China's markets are not as open as that of the United States. So that doesn't explain the entire trade surplus that China has with the United States, but it is a big part of it. So what have they been talking about? What do they need to work through? I think some pretty straightforward things like allowing the United States to sell more services into the Chinese market. That might mean, though, of course, opening up the financial sector, some of the sectors that are dominated by state-owned enterprises. So China has the economic desire to do that, but politically it's hard. But then, Dom, there's going to be other issues that are not as easy to quantify, but certainly important in terms of resolving this trade dispute, which is trying to address some of the American complaints about poor intellectual property rights protection, about unfair subsidization, cheap loans going to Chinese firms, giving them an unfair advantage. In other words, all of the lack of a level playing field. That's not something that can be corrected very quickly. And that's why, finally, the U.S. strategy here is to say, listen, you promise things and you don't always deliver, so we want a monitoring surveillance mechanism. And I suspect the first issue about market opening, they can probably resolve before March the 1st, but I don't see how these level playing field and actually monitoring surveillance, I'm not sure that can be resolved within the next month.
Linda, this is so complex. There are so many layers to this onion, perhaps more than we can even possibly fathom in the course of the next few weeks and months. How much of this is cultural for China and its history? Throughout the course of the modern times in China, over the past few centuries, if you want to call it that, they have been fighting back against what they view as mercantilist or trade aggressions by the Western world into their markets. How much of this is because they just do not want to really open up those markets again to the Western world?
Yeah, so mercantilism, this idea that other countries are there to gain a trade surplus, that's, of course, a really big issue. And generally speaking, that's been debunked by economics. In other words, actually, if you have a strong economy, your trade position reflects your economic strengths and weaknesses. So instead of targeting trade, so long as markets are fair, you need to strengthen your domestic economy. So I think for China, essentially China's current account surplus has disappeared, and trade is no longer a significant driver of China's growth. That doesn't mean that trade isn't important to China's economy. It's very important, but growth is a year-on-year change concept. So China's not going to gain much more market share than the 13% of global markets it already has in terms of manufactured exports. So I think for China, they've been somewhat protectionist in achieving that, getting to where they are today. And I think they've always viewed that as, protecting an emerging economy's market until they're ready to compete. But of course now, when you're the world's second biggest economy, that argument really doesn't hold as much water. And the Americans, and I think the Europeans and others, have been complaining for some time about this. So I think this is why it is in their interest to resolve it, because China does need a push to get it to where it needs to be, not back in the mindset it had a little while ago.
Linda, just a couple seconds left here. President Trump famously said that trade wars are easy to win. Is there a relative winner right now in this process? Is it the U.S. economy or the Chinese economy?
Well, neither are winning at the moment, but I think the long-term damage would be to China, because it's not just about trade, it's also about cutting off investment, and that's really damaging for China's ability to catch up, because China needs access to U.S. tech, it needs access to U.S. intermediate inputs, silicon chips. Without it, big companies like ZTE are struggling, nearly went under. So that's the unspoken about, but much more devastating effect of being cut off from, well, the world's biggest market.
Gotcha.
So yes, of course, trade hurts, but I think at the moment, no one is winning, Tom, but the impact may be bigger for China in the medium term.